Welcome to Anews. I'm Omar Taslim, and you're watching Turkey's Diplomacy. Global focus remains sharply divided as Ukraine pushes for new peace talks, with Turkey offering to mediate between Zelenskyy and Putin, while Gaza descends deeper into catastrophe. Israel has launched heavy bombardments on Gaza City, calling up 60,000 reservists, and Prime Minister Netanyahu is simultaneously speaking of ceasefire talks while approving occupation plans. More than 62,000 Palestinians, mostly women and children, have now been killed in the occupied Gaza Strip since the 7th of October 2023.
President Volodymyr Zelenskyy led Ukraine in marking its Independence Day on Sunday, a milestone that comes 3.5 years after Russian forces invaded the country.
Прем'єр-міністр Канади Марк Карні.
Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney joined the celebrations, pledging continued support and urging deterrence against Russia amid ongoing discussions about Western security guarantees for Ukraine.
Ukraine's defense is critical investments in our collective defense as NATO members. Because if Russia's aggression goes unchallenged, it will not stop here.
Zelenskyy praised Carney's first visit as prime minister as a big honor for his country. The two leaders also signed an agreement on drone co-production, and Carney said Ukraine would receive more than $722 million in military aid from a previously announced package next month. U.S. Special Ukraine Envoy Keith Kellogg was also present. Zelenskyy presented him with a state honor, telling him, quote, "We need peace." U.S. President Donald Trump hosted Russian President Vladimir Putin last week in an effort to reach a peace deal, but it produced no agreement. Trump has also expressed openness towards security guarantees for Kyiv. Ukraine's prime minister said on Sunday she had discussed the Ukraine-U.S. minerals agreement as well as the security guarantees issue with Kellogg. During a press conference, Zelenskyy was asked about a Wall Street Journal report that Washington had denied Kyiv permission to strike targets inside Russia with U.S.-supplied weapons.
We use our domestically produced long-range weapons. And, to be honest, we haven't been discussing such issues with the United States of America lately.
Ukraine also received messages of Independence Day support from several world leaders, including Pope Leo, Britain's King Charles, and Chinese President Xi Jinping.
Welcome back to the program. Anews editor Mustafa Kojakanar, welcome to the program.
Good morning, Roy.
Mustafa, let's start with Ukraine celebrating its Independence Day. We were just watching President Zelenskyy addressing the nation. He mentioned a few things that were really important, saying that Ukraine will continue to fight for its freedom and Ukraine's future will only be decided by the Ukrainians. Tell me more about this, Mustafa.
Omar, as you mentioned yesterday, Ukraine celebrated its Independence Day, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy led the nation to celebrate the Independence Day. As you know, Zelenskyy also hosted Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney on the sidelines of the Independence Day celebrations. Speaking at a joint news conference with the Canadian Premier, Zelenskyy reiterated Ukraine's determination to protect its national security, political sovereignty, and territorial integrity against Russian aggression. As you know, in February 2022, Russia launched its special military operation against Ukraine, citing national security threats. And the war is raging on between Ukrainian and Russian security forces right now. As you know, there is also international diplomatic push to end the war between two countries in the Eastern Europe. As you know, U.S. President Donald Trump Trump welcomed his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, to Alaska to discuss the possible steps to reach a ceasefire or peace deal. Then we know that Trump hosted Ukrainian leader Zelenskyy and European leaders at the White House, and they exchanged views on the latest developments about the Ukraine-Russia war and possible steps to end the war. As you know, right now there are some discussions about NATO-style security guarantees for Ukraine. We know that Zelenskyy is pursuing security assurances from Ukraine's Western allies. But right now, the details about security guarantees still remain unclear and uncertain. As you know, Trump administration is ruling out sending American troops to Ukraine to keep peace between Kyiv and Moscow. On the other hand, some Western nations are determined to send their military forces to Ukraine to give security assurances to Ukraine. But we know that Russia is strictly opposing Western military forces to be deployed for Ukraine, because one of the reasons why Russia started its military campaign against Ukraine is Ukraine's aspiration for NATO membership. And within this context, Russian decision makers, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, are reiterating Russia's opposition to the Western powers in Ukraine. There are still uncertainties about Ukraine's political future, but transatlantic countries are trying to show solidarity and unity in terms of addressing Russian challenges in the region. But I don't think that we can talk about unity and solidarity among Western countries right now.
So there's one thing that Russia is not opposing, and that's peace talks with Ukraine. Now, Lavrov has said that Russia is ready to, start those peace talks, those bilateral peace talks, but Ukraine has been hesitant. It's showing reluctance, to join those talks. What's stopping Ukraine from, participating in these talks right now?
Umar, right now there is a pressure for a bilateral meeting between Russian President Vladimir Putin and his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelenskyy. As you know, Russia is not considering Zelenskyy as a legitimate leader in terms of representing the Ukrainian people, because Russia is claiming that Ukraine will be supposed to hold a new presidential election to elect a new president. And right now, Putin is hesitating to meet with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. On the other hand, we know that Ukrainian leadership is also hesitating to meet with Russia, because they are accusing Russia of threatening Ukraine's political sovereignty and territorial integrity. But we know that Trump is pushing for a bilateral meeting between Ukrainian and Russian leadership. He is claiming that he will also join bilateral talks between Zelenskyy and Putin to make it a trilateral summit. Right now, there are international pressures on both sides. I think that if they want to deal with their bilateral or security problems, I think both the Russian and Ukrainian decision makers will be supposed to sit at the same negotiating table. Yes, delegations are meeting each other regularly to discuss the possible steps for reaching a ceasefire or peace deal. But right now, it is up to leaders to determine the steps to end the war between Ukraine and Russia. As you know, since the very beginning of the crisis, Turkey has been always calling for dialogue and diplomacy to cope with the security challenges in the region. Turkish decision makers have been trying to bring Putin, Zelenskyy and Trump together in Istanbul or Ankara. We know that Istanbul hosted several rounds of peace negotiations between Ukrainian and Russian delegations in terms of contributing to the confidence-building measures between two warring sides. I think that Turkey and United States will continue push for bilateral meeting between Putin and Zelenskyy. Right now, there are also some discussions about the venue for the bilateral talks between Russian and Ukraine leaders. I think that Turkey's Istanbul or Ankara will welcome Putin and Zelenskyy for discussions about Ukraine's political future.
Mustafa, why has Turkey's role been so important ever since the war started in Ukraine?
Umar, because we know that Turkey has been enjoying close relationships with both Ukraine and Russia in many fields, ranging from politics and economy to military and trade. As you know, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan reaffirmed Turkey's ironclad support for Ukraine's unitary structure, political sovereignty and territorial integrity. In 2014, we know that Russia annexed Crimea, and no one, including Turkey, is recognizing the illegal annexation of Crimea by the Russian Federation. And Ukrainian decision makers are always praising Turkey's balanced approach to the Ukraine-Russia war. Yes, Turkey reiterates its support for Ukraine, but on the other hand, Turkey is not joining a Western campaign against Russia. And Russian decision makers are also hailing Turkey's diplomatic efforts to mediate or facilitate the peace talks between two warring sides. On the other hand, international community is also praising Turkey's approach to the Ukraine-Russia conflict. As you know, Turkish decision makers reiterate at every opportunity that there will be no losers in just peace and there will be no winners at the continued wars. On the other hand, we know that Turkey has been always calling for regional solutions for regional problems. And as you know, last week, President Erdoğan held a phone conversation with his Ukrainian counterpart Zelenskyy to discuss Turkey's role in terms of giving security assurances to Ukraine. President Erdoğan reaffirmed Turkey's strong support for peace and stability in the Black Sea region. Turkish security forces, I think, are right now determined to clear the region from the mines. As you know, Russia is opposing Western military forces to be deployed to Ukraine. Maybe they will be okay for the Turkish security forces. I think that there will be some discussions about Turkey and Turkish military forces' possible role to keep peace between Ukraine and Russia. I think that if the international community wants to see peace between Ukraine and Russia, they will be supposed to take Turkey's security demands into the consideration.
Mustafa, yesterday, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance said that Russia has made some significant concessions to end the war in Ukraine. Now, can you tell me about these concessions? Obviously, we don't know the details, but what could they be? And we remember, like, when the meetings were held in Türkiye, in Istanbul, in Ankara, and when the delegations from Russia and Ukraine were here, they had their demands as well. So just to remind our audiences, tell us about those demands from both sides and the concessions that Vance has said that Russia has made to end the war in Ukraine.
Omar, as you know, Trump started his second presidency at the White House in January, and since then the Trump administration has been pushing for immediate cessation of conflicts between Ukraine and Russia. And within this context, Trump is urging both Ukraine and Russia to cede their territory to reach peace and stability. As you know, Trump is also asking for some concessions from both sides. We know that Trump is eager to recognize the illegal annexation of Crimea by Russia. On the other hand, Ukraine reiterates that the country will continue to defend its political sovereignty and territorial integrity. On the other hand, Russia is calling upon Ukraine to give up its political sovereignty and national security. Right now, there are several different demands coming from both sides. I think that these security demands need to be reconciled by the regional and international stakeholders. Right now, United States is trying to play a facilitator or mediator role between Ukraine and Russia, and they are asking for concessions from both sides. I don't think that both Russia and Ukraine are ready to give concessions right now, because there are several several demands coming from both sides. As you know, Ukraine is asking for immediate ceasefire and the full withdrawal of the Russian military forces from the occupied territories. On the other hand, Russian President Vladimir Putin claims that international stakeholders will be supposed to eliminate the root causes of the conflict. While one side is calling for a ceasefire, the other side is calling for long-term peace agreements. And right now it is up to regional and international stakeholders to mediate or facilitate diplomatic talks between Ukraine and Russia. I think Turkey can play an important role in terms of bringing peace and stability to the region.
Mustafa, before we move to the second part of the program, obviously we're going to discuss Gaza in detail, but just take me through the latest developments that we've seen over the past 48 hours. I believe the Israeli invasion has begun. People are being killed as usual. This has happened every day since the 7th of October 2023. What else do we know, Mustafa? Tell me about the latest developments from the occupied Gaza Strip and Netanyahu's plans of a complete invasion of the occupied Gaza Strip.
Omar, it is evident that Israeli security forces are determined to occupy Gaza Strip right now. On the other hand, we know that starvation and malnutrition crises are gripping the occupied territory right now. People are being starved to death by the Israeli security forces, and international criticism is mounting on Israel right now over the dire humanitarian conditions. And as you know, since the very beginning of the crisis, Turkey has been trying to increase international awareness about Israel's genocidal acts and ethnic cleansing policies in the region. Today, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan is participating in the Organization of Islamic Cooperation Foreign Ministers meeting in Saudi Arabia's Jeddah. I think that Fidan will reiterate Turkey's strong determination to uphold the Palestinian rights and Palestinian cause. As you know, Turkey has been always advocating for the two-state solution to the decades-old Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Turkey has been giving its strong support for Palestinian state based on the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. I think that Turkey's leading diplomatic efforts are yielding positive results in terms of increasing international awareness about the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people. As you know, on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly meeting in September, many countries will recognize the Palestinian statehood. I think it will help Palestinian people defend their legitimate rights. But personally, I don't think that criticism or condemnation or recognition decisions yield positive results in terms of defending the Palestinian rights. I think that we have to see some coercive measures from the international community, Western countries in particular. Coercive measures, I think, can include arms embargo and economic sanctions on Israel. As you know, Turkey has already severed its trade activities with Israel. Turkey has been also calling for international arms embargo on Israel. I think that Turkish decision makers will be at the diplomatic forefront in terms of holding Israel accountable for its war crimes and crimes against humanity in the Gaza Strip.
Mustafa, thanks for that update. We'll be right back with you.
Thank you, Mark.
The Blue Homeland Naval Parade lit up Istanbul's Bosphorus on Sunday as part of Technofest celebrations, featuring Turkey's largest warship TCG Anadolu, the historic Savarona, and a fleet of vessels that drew crowds along the strait during Victory Week.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan on Sunday welcomed a parade of distinguished naval vessels passing through the Istanbul Strait as part of the Technofest Blue Homeland celebrations. The procession featured Turkey's indigenously built and largest warship, the TCG Anadolu, alongside the historic TCG Savarona, once used by Republic founder Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, and several other vessels. The parade began near the Yavuz Sultan Selim Bridge and continued along the Bosphorus, drawing large crowds in several districts before concluding near the July 15 Martyrs Bridge. President Erdoğan observed the event from the Dolmabahce working office, where naval crews honored him with a traditional salute and a 21-gun tribute. Standing alongside the Turkish First Lady, dressed in white in a nod to the Naval Forces Command, the president waved to sailors and spectators as the ships passed. The parade concluded with a final salute from the vessels, marking one of the signature highlights of this year's Technofest celebrations.
The return of the Savarona, which holds a distinguished place in our nation's historical memory, to the seas has become a symbol that renews our ties with the past and strengthens our sense of pride. Our country's march toward a stronger future will continue with even greater strength, fueled by the inspiration and vision of our youth. May our Victory Week be blessed in advance.
Welcome back to the program. Now let's take a look at the front page of Daily Sabah. Mustafa, as we were discussing the TCG Anadolu, many other vessels crossed the Bosphorus Strait. What was the significance of yesterday's parade, Mustafa?
Omar, I can clearly say that Turkish Navy showed its strength in Istanbul Technofest Blue Homeland Parade yesterday. As you know, select units of the Turkish Navy, its multi-purpose amphibious assault ship, were set for a glorious parade along Istanbul's shoreline on Sunday as part of the Technofest Blue Homeland event. And it clearly showcased Turkey's naval and military maritime capabilities. As you know, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan also welcomed Turkish Navy ships sailing through Istanbul Strait, and it is clearly showing that Turkish decision makers are determined to realize the country's Blue Homeland Doctrine. Blue Homeland Doctrine was adopted by the Turkish decision makers in terms of upholding Turkey's national security interests in the surrounding seas, and it is evident that Turkish military forces are also determined to strengthen Turkey's naval capabilities in terms of bringing long-standing peace and stability to Turkey's seas. On the other hand, we know that Turkey is determined to strengthen its bilateral relationships with several countries in the Eastern Mediterranean. As you know, Turkey signed a maritime deal with Libya in 2019, and it totally changed the geopolitical structure in the region. But on the other hand, we know that Greek Cypriot administration and Israel are trying to obstruct Turkey's diplomatic efforts to bring peace and stability to the Eastern Mediterranean. As you know, Turkey has been always calling for good neighborly relationships with all stakeholders, but it doesn't mean that Turkey will allow any fait accompli in the Eastern Mediterranean.
Mustafa, just before I let you go, a few weeks ago, we saw Turkey, Libya, and Italy coming together in Istanbul. That meeting also focused on the Mediterranean. It also focused on the refugee crisis. Tell me, how important is that partnership for the Eastern Mediterranean?
Well, as we mentioned that Turkey's deal with Libya changed geopolitical situation in the region, and in August, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan welcomed both Italian and Libyan prime ministers in Istanbul to discuss the latest security developments in the Eastern Mediterranean. As you know, Turkey's support for Libya bring peace and stability to the war-torn country. On the other hand, right now it seems that Italy is reiterating its Turkey's determination to bring peace and stability to the region. I think that cooperation and collaboration among Turkey, Libya, and Italy will yield positive results in terms of ensuring regional peace and stability in the Eastern Mediterranean. But as we mentioned, that Israel, Greece, and Greek Cypriot administration administration are pursuing expansionist and maximalist geopolitical agenda in the region. We know that Greek Cypriot administration is turning a blind eye to Turkish Cypriot people's legitimate rights in the region. Turkey has been always calling for a two-state solution to the decades-old Cyprus dispute. On the other hand, Turkish Cypriot President Ersin Tatar reiterates that there are two separate nations living on the island right now. Turkey has been always calling for fair distribution for all regional stakeholders, for natural resources located in the region. I think that if the regional stakeholders want to see tranquility in the Eastern Mediterranean, I think that they will be supposed to cooperate Turkey.
Mustafa, thanks for that update.
You're welcome.
Now let's take a look at this news report and we'll be right back.
Thick smoke billowed in Gaza City after Israeli strikes on Sunday as Israel's leaders vowed to press on with a planned offensive on the city. Israeli planes and tanks pounded its eastern and northern outskirts overnight, destroying buildings and homes, residents said. Palestinians were seen mourning loved ones who they said were killed in the attacks, including children. This woman said her 9-year-old nephew, Hamada Abedrabo, was leaving home to buy food when he was hit. The boy's father said the family were there, having been displaced from Jabalia in the north. The houses are gone, everything is gone, and my son is gone, he said, adding that he hoped this would be the last sad thing and for this ordeal to end. Israel approved a plan this month to seize control of Gaza City, describing it as Hamas's last bastion. It's not expected to begin for a few weeks, leaving room for mediators Egypt and Qatar to try and resume ceasefire talks. Israel's Defense Minister Israel Katz on Sunday vowed to push on with the offensive, which has raised alarm abroad and triggered protests at home. Katz on Friday said Gaza City will be razed unless Hamas agrees to end the war on Israel's terms and release all remaining hostages. In a statement on Sunday, Hamas said Israel's plan to take over Gaza City showed it wasn't serious about a ceasefire, saying a ceasefire deal was, quote, the only way to return the hostages. Around half of the enclave's 2 million people are living in Gaza City. A few thousand have left, or some say they will not leave no matter what. Osama Kohail questioned where he could go as he described a previous attempt to reach what was said to be a humanitarian zone in the southern city of Khan Yunis. We were told to go to safe zones, to go to Al-Mawasi, he said. We went to Al-Mawasi. We saw humiliation and difficulties in Al-Mawasi.
Welcome back to the program. Joining us now from the Pakistani capital is political analyst Javed Rana. Javed, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Umar.
Javed, let's start with what's happening in the occupied Gaza Strip. Netanyahu has gone all out with his invasion of the Strip. Tell us more. 1,000 buildings have also been destroyed by Israel in the last few weeks. What else can we see, Javed?
I think the fact the 1,000 buildings have been destroyed within last 3 weeks is something big. It's not so easy to destroy 1,000 buildings. That means it looks like there is a clear carpet bombing going on in the Gaza city. It's a city of 1.5 million people. We don't know how many people are being killed, how many people are under the rebels. But that does shows that the scale of the aggression, the scale of the genocide has further intensified, has further expanded, and with the usual international sense of impunity for the apartheid state of Israel. Now, in a broader context, on one hand, there is a starvation. On the other hand, there is a air bombing. And then there is also beginning of a so-called ground operation. By a ground operation means first they soften the targets, which means by soften the target means the killing the population, clearing the entire buildings, and only then the Israeli troops can penetrate, can invade, and then they will declare their so-called victory. Basically, it is an extermination campaign whereby they would not see anybody on the ground, and only then Israeli covered troops would be there on the ground. So I think this is a terrible situation. Whatever we were hearing about so-called ceasefire agreement, despite the fact that the Hamas has called off the bluff of Israel by accepting the Israeli proposal by and large on Israeli terms and conditions, nonetheless, we have not seen any breakthrough. That shows that Israel, in a very systematic manner, has been deceiving, hoodwinking its so-called regional partners and also the international community in a very systematic manner, and nobody is bothered about. People are being killed as we speak. Just about an hour ago, another Palestinian journalist have been killed just inside the hospital through a drone attack. And that means Israel doesn't want to see what is happening, because destroying 1,000 buildings means that there were people inside. And generally, going by the track record, Israel Air Forces, they just give few minutes for people to evacuate the building, and then it follows the attack. So I think this is a terrible situation. We have been dehumanized, and we are in a kind of a situation where it is a normalization of the dehumanization of Palestinians, and nobody is bothered about.
Javed, yesterday we also saw something symbolic. France summoned the U.S. ambassador for his remarks, saying that France has not done enough to counter anti-Semitism. Of course, it's not going to hold any value, but this also shows that France is taking action. France is more pro-Palestinian. What's your view on that? Do you think that this would make any difference?
I think the remarks of the U.S. ambassador to France are in contradiction to what Donald Trump just said a few weeks ago, when he said that the starvation in Gaza is real, and then he had claimed that it's only USA who is pumping money to contain the scale of the starvation in Gaza. Now, the U.S. ambassador to France has written a letter to the French government saying that there is a surge in anti-Semitism, and then part of it is also the fact that France has announced to recognize the two-state solution in the occupied territory, basically recognizing Palestinian as a state. And now, basically, this policy statement of France is also anti-Semitic. Look at the nonsense that Israel has been projecting through U.S. ambassador. And now we have seen that the White House is backing up the statement of the U.S. ambassador to France. We have to understand the networking of Zionism in the White House. The ambassador to France, who is he? Kushner. His last name is Kushner. You may recall the son-in-law of Donald Trump is Jared Kushner. He's the father of the ambassador to France. Is the father of Jared Kushner, the son-in-law of Donald Trump. I think that speaks volume. This is how, in a very systematic manner, apartheid state of Israel, through its Zionist network, basically has captured the White House, handicapped everybody who matters in decision-making in the White House. It is, again, in contradiction to the Donald Trump's declared assertion that there is a starvation going on in France. And now, in reaction to that, whatever is happening in the world, more particularly in France, when France announced that it is going to recognize the state of Palestine, that shows essentially that Israel is not bothered about, because it has taken over the entire geostrategic positions from where there could possibly be any pressure could have been exerted onto the apartheid Israel. This is a terrible situation, because Zionist network appears to be prevailing, but at the same time, we should not be discouraged by the facts. that there is also other side of the picture, the flip side, and the flip side is that the international opinion has turned so much against Israel that now people love to hate apartheid Israel. And there is a prevalent sense in the West that Israel is controlling the West, more particularly the U.S. decision-making. And I think sooner or later, possibly there would be a violent reaction. And I fear the Jewish community would be targeted, though I believe there are many good members of the Jewish community who are pro-Palestinian. But the kind of the policies that Israel has come up with over the period of the time, I think it is also a recipe for disaster for the peaceful Jewish members in the USA and elsewhere in the world.
Javed, Israel is not only controlling the West, it's now controlling the Middle East as well, because yesterday we saw how Israel bombed Yemen. The presidential palace was targeted. There were many power plant stations that were targeted. 6 people were killed. How have the Houthis reacted to the latest attacks?
Well, I think, frankly speaking, if there is only threat to the apartheid state at this point of time, that is Yemen. Whatever the military support that Hamas and other jihadi groups are getting, that is coming from Houthis. It's not just Iranian factor. It's not just Iran which has been backing up Houthis. I think the kind of the political dispensation that is existing in Yemen in form of Houthis, that over the period of time have shown a very important resistance against the apartheid structure. And but again, since these attacks do not much for Israel in the broader context, because these attacks have not been frequent. Whatever the capacity, the military capacity Houthis have, I think they have managed to cause certain disruptions inside the apartheid Israel, and also more particularly in the Red Sea. But we should not forget that when Houthis were attacking Israel's ships in the Red Sea, from where the trade of Israel was being redirected, it was rerouted to Saudi Arabia, from there to the Jordan, and from Jordan to the occupied West Bank, and from there to the mainland apartheid Israel. So that is a problematic area. Saudi Arabia is a part of the problem. It's not a part of the solution.
Javed, I want to interrupt you. We have a live event. Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan is addressing the OIC's Foreign Ministers Summit in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. Let's take a look at that.
Derinleşiyor ki halk aslında buraya sığınmış durumda. Yerleşim projeleri Batı Şeria'da devam ediyor ve Filistin devletinin
Our projects are continuing, and right now with the provoking of those people, it is threatening the holy status of this mosque. And we need to have a permanent ceasefire. And we needed to have humanitarian aid. They accepted it, and our brothers and sisters from Qatar, they also supported us. Qatar, Egypt, and United States, they are supporting the peace, and we will support the peace as well. We are ready, but people should join us. What's clear is that the Israel government do not chase peace. They want to get rid of those people, and they have to be stopped. Gaza is ours, and it belongs to the Palestinian people. We needed to rebuild Gaza together with our common efforts. We are increasing the awareness of the United Nations, and public started to see this truth. And Israel's occupation policies and pressure policies, people are started to show reactions to that. And in July, we had this conference, and it was a historical moment for us and for both governments. We provided global peace We included Australia as well. These are late but valuable steps. The Arab League's labors were important. We determined the Palestine's status like that. So this shows our common efforts are important. We need to work together. It's a truth that we cannot deny. We need a strong and coordinated pressure towards Israel. Israel should be kept under pressure. And in recent days, we would have this United Nations Council, and it will be important for us. About that, the Palestinian government should strengthen their institutions as well. They need financial and technical support in order to stay on their ground in a stronger way. Distinguished participants, if we do not provide ceasefire as soon as possible, Israel will increase its occupation plans and it will continue its violence. So we should get together, we should have our common efforts, and we should continue our momentum and we should support it. And about European nations, we should also take some steps. About that framework, Gaza should be ready for tomorrow. We should provide support. And Türkiye, when it comes to that, we are doing whatever we can and we're ready to do whatever we can. Their Excellencies, please do not forget that. We are here for the Aqsa Mosque and we are defending the Palestine cause. And we're questioning our existence. And we know that Israel's attacks will not stop on Palestine, to Syria, Lebanon, and to Iran. We are seeing the attacks, and they are trying to disturb the stability of the region. That's what we thought. If we do not stop Israel, that government beyond Middle East, we would face serious problems. So we should be determined, and hopefully Palestine people will reach their peace and justice. Thank you.
Now I would like to give the floor to my dear colleague, Sitting Modern Nice, Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation and Gambians Abroad, to deliver his speech on behalf of the Gambia, Chair of the 15th Islamic Summit. Please, brother, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Your Excellency, Dr. Hakan Fidan, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Turkey and Chairman of the 51st session of the Council of Foreign. Your Highness, Prince Faisal bin.
Welcome back to the program. Javed, we were just watching Hakan Fidan address the emergency session of the OIC in Saudi Arabia, and there were some many important statements that he made as well. And we've been listening to these statements as well. Common efforts are important. Turkey is continuing to work for peace. We are ready to do whatever we can for the Palestinians. And he also acknowledged the fact that Israel's not going to stop the attacks, because we were just talking about it. Israel attacked Yemen yesterday. What are your comments on this, Javed?
I think these were very realistic comments. And then he also, at the end of his speech, I did hear that he also called for a coordinated, united stance on Israel, a coordination among the member countries of OIC. I think that is extremely important. You may recall that there were previous sessions, and I think about a year ago, there was a summit on it when Turkey, Iran, and there was another Muslim country from North Africa, and they had come up with the plan that let there be a trade bloc because a trade blockage by one particular country would not resolve the problem. There has to be a coordinated response. I think, again, the Turkey's position has been once again retaliated, and then the foreign minister has very rightly pointed. But the bigger problem is, there are people inside the hall who are not willing to listen to this option, because they need, once again, a statement, a condemnation, where they will call for the international community to intervene. But again, practically, meaningfully, nothing would be done on the ground. This is the Yemen under Houthis who are militarily attacking Israel. They are the one who are causing a lot of problem for Israel. You may recall what Donald Trump had said, that the Houthis would not attack the U.S. because Houthis had a deal with the USA that the U.S. ships would not come under attack. Now, basically, the U.S. has distanced itself from the Israel so far as the Red Sea is concerned. So again, now we have not seen the U.S. attacking Houthis. So again, at least Houthis have done something. But may I ask what other countries have done? Diplomatically, yes, they have made a lot of hue and cry. Some countries are very enthusiastically pursuing for a coordinated response, like Turkey, like Iran. But as long as Saudi Arabia does not spring into action, I don't foresee that there would be any change on the ground. We should not forget it is a UAE which has been at the heart of the allegation from Hamas that UAE's Red Crescent has been providing all kind of intelligence to Mossad from Gaza about the location of the jihadi groups there, from where they've been launching rocket attacks. So, and then these have been the UAE's property dealers in the Jerusalem who are trying to buy properties from Muslims and handing over to the Jews. Basically, that's the Zionist agenda, to remove the Muslim population from the Baitul Muqaddas, the East Jerusalem, which is the site of the third holiest site of Islam. So again, when these Arab countries are already partners in the crime, partners in the genocide with the apartheid Israel, we should not expect that they will come up with anything which is meaningful. Other Muslim countries, non-Arab countries like Turkey, like Iran, I think their efforts for the time being, I don't foresee that they would yield any meaningful results because of these Arab Norths who are partners in the crimes.
Political analyst Javed Rana, thank you so much for that analysis and for being a part of our program again. Anews editor Mustafa Kojakanar, thank you for being with us in the studios.
Thank you, Mar.
That brings us to the end of our program. Thanks for joining us. Bye for now.